Hello everyone, I'm Kim Lemon. Thank you for joining WGAL for this special event. In this program, Ron Martin, Janelle Stelson, and I will take you on a fascinating journey through time, television time. On this very day, 60 years ago, WGAL signed on the air, and I am so proud to be a part of it. Indeed, everyone who worked here has scribed their name into a little piece of history. Over the next hour, we'll show you why WGAL really was and continues to be a pioneer in the evolution of television.
That's right, Kim. But nowadays, it's easy to take television for granted. It's become an indispensable part of our lives. But when you stop and think about it, compared to, say, the telephone or the radio, television is a pretty new technology. And it, of course, continues to grow and improve. But in the beginning, TV was anything but easy. Aside from the extraordinary leaps in technology to just transmit a picture over the air, there was the little problem of knowing what people would like to watch. What would make them leave their longtime companion, the radio, for an expensive box with a tiny fuzzy picture? It was certainly a challenge for those few brave early television pioneers, steadfastly convinced this new medium would be the future. And one of the most influential of this early group was a small publishing company with a handful of radio stations and a brand new TV license, WGAL Channel 4. Yes, Channel 4 in Lancaster, Pennsylvania.
Good afternoon, television friends.
In 1949, a number of television stations signed on the air, including this one. But what was so remarkable was that WGAL became just the 37th commercial station in the country. It was the first station on the air between Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. Suddenly, Lancaster was on the map as the smallest city in the country with a commercial TV station. It all began in 1926 when the Steinman family's Lancaster Newspapers publishing group hired York native and Millersville University graduate Claire McCullough as an advertising salesman. At that time, the Steinmans were exploring an investment in radio and had acquired the license to WGAL-AM, adding it to two other stations they already had on the air. In 1931, they asked McCullough to manage their fledgling radio network. After the war, where he became an Army colonel tasked with strengthening the Armed Forces radio network, McCullough helped the Steinmans enter the television business. Claire McCullough went on to become one of the most influential and visionary men in television. He organized the first state broadcasting organization, helped write the first television code of practices, established copyright protections, chaired the National Association of Broadcasters, and helped clean up the quiz show scandals of the late 50s. His work was recognized by some very important people of the time, and as its station manager from the very first day, Claire McCullough retired from WGAL in 1974. The first people to see WGAL were a group of appliance dealers invited to a closed circuit test at downtown Lancaster's Stevens Hotel. Now remember, back then, radios and now TVs were sold at neighborhood appliance stores. Even though that was a success, I'll bet it had to be a nervous moment when the engineers pulled the switch that put WGAL on the air. This day, 60 years ago, from their first studios on 24 South Queen Street in downtown Lancaster.
We did a closed circuit broadcast for the appliance dealers. Beth Williams sang "Snug as a Bug in a Rug," and Uncle Charlie Mazer did a magic act, and I ran the camera. On March 18th, I went down and read the announcement, put station on the air, and then Dave Brandt and I were the first two to operate on the air. We were Channel 4 up to 1952. Channel 4, we had limited power because Washington and New York had Channel 4s. Mohawk Indian high steel workers put this Channel 8 antenna atop the tower at 8 West King Street on top of the newspaper building. And the next day we went on as Channel 8. We did a lot of shows. We did interviews. We did live shows of clothing. We did a show called Name the Brand, where we had products from the grocery stores, and Mary Jane Landis was hired to do commercials.
I held up the sponsor's product and talked, and then we would give a key phrase or give some sort of a cue word for people when we call in to answer the question, and they would receive some sort of a prize. And of course it was 15 minutes long, and so we had to do a lot of ad-libbing and talking. So after the first show, the program manager came out and he said, "You did fine." And he says, "I'm going to give you a 50-cent per show raise." I made all of $3. Well, I think the early days of television, I always told people that they were radio programs adapted to television with some video.
Good afternoon, television friends. We'd like to welcome you to Lebanon County's Extension program. The theme of
Nobody had classes in television. They used people who could do things on stage, stand up in front of a group of people and talk.
Well, everything was live. We did a lot of interviews on the weekend, and I can remember doing 5 15-minute interviews back to back. When people would come in while the commercial was on between the show, sit down, and I would hardly know why they were there.
When I did Name the Brand or Jackpot or any of those morning giveaways, and if I had to do a commercial, when you did commercials, I did the food fair commercials live. So if you had a 30-second or a minute commercial, you had to be there. So I might go home. I used to hang a load of diapers on the line and maybe go down and do a commercial, then go home, maybe take off my laundry off the line and then go down and do another commercial.
Early television was really an exciting project because anything could happen. The sound goes out. It wasn't always the picture that went out, but the sound goes out. And of course, we had a slide that I made that shows this pin dropping and bouncing. And I think the wording was something about quiet, isn't it?
Television was a little bumpy at first. There was always a creative solution to any problem, especially in the talented hands of the early WGAL staff and crew. But now the people were tuning in. The demand for more and more programming increased. When we come back, we'll look back at some of the most memorable and enduring shows ever produced at WGAL. Stay with us.
Portions of this program were made possible by the Rohrer family of companies, 1 Hour Heating and Air Conditioning, Benjamin Franklin the Punctual Plumber, and Mr. Sparky.
This special program is brought to you in part by the advertising agency Barry Bruce & Company, Lancaster.
By 1951, WGAL began signing on before noon, and in 1952 was on the air at 7 each morning with Dave Garraway's Today Show. And while WGAL had its pick of network programming from the 3 networks of the day, Dumont, CBS, and NBC, there was still an awful lot of time to fill. So locally produced shows ruled the air, all done live. Some were patterned after successful radio shows, others were theatrical or variety. And when all else failed, someone would just start playing the piano. It took some creative invention to produce shows that would define an era and last for decades. And at WGAL, some extraordinary shows were taken to the air.
Paul Rodenhauser was Santa Claus back in those days. We had children come in live. Of course, they all sat in Santa's lap and that kind of thing. And Paul said to me, "I'd like you to do the commercials and the open and close of the show and control the children and the duties that you do that way." And he says, "Can you and Jim work something out with the puppets?" And we said, "Sure." And 2 weeks later, Paul called me into his office and he said, "We have that much mail." He says, "Do you think you and Jim could continue with a program?" And we said, yes, we could. And it was slapstick theater. And then it developed as we developed more puppets as the time went on, and as we developed our sets went to color, when we went into color, then it became Percy Platypus and his friends. We ad-libbed, the puppets and I talked to one another. Everybody kids me, they say she talks to puppets, but we listened to each other too.
In the downtown studio, we just didn't have enough room to do what we wanted to do, and to expand, we were happy to move out here. They built the building in 1955 in the current location, and I believe that that was the first building built specifically to be a television station. We went in on Christmas Day, 1956. We had 2 studios, dual control rooms. We had a better place for our guests to come and feel at home.
I did mostly interviews with the local Rotary and the Chicken Queen, or I mean, so many queens. You know, we had to judge beauty contests a lot. So we had the Egg Queen, and there was a Poultry Queen, and there still is, I'm sure.
Well, in addition to the local people that we had on our show, we did have a lot of celebrities. Some of them passed through town and their agents called. Some of them I called. And it was wonderful. It added another dimension to the show. There were people like George Hamilton, Roy Rogers, and Dale Evans. Natalie Cole was probably one of her first television appearances because she was 22. She was right out of college. Julie Nixon Eisenhower came when with Barbara Eisenhower, her mother-in-law, when her father was president. That was a big occasion here because the Secret Service came.
When the antenna was on the top of the building and we were on channel 4, the signal did not go out very far. It was local. Then later on, when they built the new antenna in Pelham, because they wanted to cover everything, then that's when they needed somebody who had a lot of experience in promotion, because we have all these communities throughout central Pennsylvania. We wanted to invite them to watch WGAL-TV. The manager at that time, his name was Harold Miller. He had a friend in the Kiwanis Club who made signs, and his friend came to him and said, "Hey, why don't you put signs up all over the place identifying the borders of townships and towns and cities?" The sign companies went to the property owners and said, "Could we put this thing in? It's a public service for you. It says drive carefully."
Back in Woody's promotion reign here at the station, and I really respect Paul as one of the pioneers in broadcast promotion, period. It was a lot more about generating items to get out into the general public. The merchandising that this television station did, I dare you to find an item that Channel 8 didn't put its logo on at one time or another.
In the early 50s, we got a Magnavox TV, our first TV, at my house in Lidditz, black and white, phonograph, TV, radio. And on that set, I remember watching in the mid-50s the first Call of the Outdoors shows, black and white, of course, with the inimitable Harry Alleman.
Call of the Outdoors. Now here's Call of the Outdoors host, Harry Alleman.
Hello there. A couple of weeks ago,
there was nothing else like it on TV. He took us hunting and fishing, did conservation topics through the 50s and the 60s, and he had that show from 1955 until 1980. It was his life.
Hello and welcome to the Gospel Train program. I'm David Shepard, your host, your neighbor, and your friend.
My dad was always interested in gospel music. He had a radio program on WLAN for many years, Gospel Train. And then when he started talking to Nelson Sears, him and Nelson Sears concocted the idea to put this on television, put Gospel Train on television. At the time, there was no exposure to gospel music on television anywhere in this area.
No, in those days, it was a 6-day week, and I think I asked Nelson Sears, what am I doing on the 6th day? He said, well, you're doing your regular announcing. And you're going to be hosting dance party. I said, dance what? I had no idea. And he said, no dance party. Well, thank heaven, Trixie Jackson was there to save me from Sure Apparel. Trixie had been the co-hostess with Terry Abrams, a very successful run of Dance Party for years. Well, I recall Trixie introducing me that first time when all of the students from the high school were there, and I was behind the curtain, and she gave me this great build-up and said, "Here's Wendell Woodbury, a new talent from Maine," and I opened the curtains and, "Hey, kids," and then ran across the studio and promptly tripped on the stairs going up the platform.
By the late 50s, WGAL was exclusively NBC. And while the early pioneers of WGAL were hard at work producing their shows, there were some pretty good ones coming from the network, some of which I bet you'll remember.
This is the first time that a television show is going commercial from Hollywood across the nation.
This is John Cameron Swayze.
Everybody's heard about Hop Along Cassidy.
Portions of this program were made possible by Conestoga Tours, Finch Jewelers, and Tomlinson Bomberger Lawn Care, Landscape, and Pest Control.
If you're enjoying this special presentation of WGAL's 60th anniversary, why not own a copy? For only $19.95, you can own a piece of broadcasting history. The pioneering accomplishments of WGAL are documented in this critically acclaimed special. Plus, there are extra features on the DVD, clips of uncovered film found in the WGAL archives. Call toll-free 877-542-8821 or visit WGAL60.com to order your copy today.
Portions of this program were made possible by Advanced Tech Hearing Aid Centers, TPM Health Insurance, and Lancaster Catholic High School.
The 1960s ushered in the decade that really solidified television as everyone's eyes to the world. Color TV was becoming more popular. A new president who understood the power of TV, the space race, and unfortunately some pretty frightening world events. And here at home, WGAL was on top of it all. Even from its very beginning, WGAL was committed to broadcasting the news, both national and local.
We are out here in the square, downtown Lancaster, and we want to get just a sidewalk sampling of public opinion, how some of the folks feel about the election, and let you, the viewers, know how your neighbors feel about it. Sir, how about you coming in here and joining us? Tell the folks on the other end of this, hook up your name.
Bob Schultz, Julietta Street in Lancaster.
What do you do, Bob?
I work at the New Holland Machine Company.
Well, you want to move in here just a little bit more. Tell us, Bob, how you feel about the election.
Well, I was at the polls about 20 minutes ago.
Dave Brandt was a remarkable guy. He taught me how to do a newscast. He said, memorize or give the first story in your own words, then you can read the rest of it, then at the end give the last story in your own words. And he said people will think you memorized it all.
The news set of the day was these little individual desks all over Studio A, and you could hardly see or hear whoever was back here.
At the time I first started here, there was a 6 o'clock newscast, an 11 o'clock newscast, and there were morning news cut-ins. And at lunchtime there was 5 minutes of news on a noon program called Noonday on 8.
Each one of the anchors produced their own segment. The regional news was encapsulated all by itself. John McElharney was the anchor, and he would produce 6-7 minutes of the local news. And Wendell Woodbury did the world news. He produced that 6-7 minutes of the world news. Back in those days, you had photographs that you put up as aids for stories from around the world.
And I remember sitting on the desk over there in that corner of the room, ready to go, and there was a guy named Bill Custer, who was the Atlantic weatherman prior to me. And as he finished the weather, he walked across the studio and he tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Bill, don't be nervous. There's probably only a couple million people watching." Just what I wanted to hear.
During the political campaigns, we had all of the top politicians of the age.
It is time that all Americans begin to think of the future of their country. Because if we don't do something about the future of the country, we may not have a future ourselves. As you know, my brother Ed went to West York High School. I remember I went out there the year after he graduated and gave a commencement address. I guess about the poorest one they ever had out there, and they probably had some pretty poor ones.
I guess you could say I was among what we call maybe the second generation of television news reporters back then. And we did learn from these pioneers who wrote the book. But there was still, television news was still evolving. It was still television was still, in the 60s, very young medium. Sound cameras were heavy and hard to carry. They were not very portable. And given the fact that cameras were not portable, most of what was shot on silent film.
We always did reporting, even when I was doing weather. I, for example, would go to Reading every day for a long period of time and be expected to come back with 3 or 4 stories, edit those stories, write those stories, get them on the air for 6 o'clock, and somehow get a 6 o'clock weather show together too.
There were people who were making the decisions. The people who were in charge were not afraid to listen to the reporters. Okay. Get the story. Do what you have to do to get the story. But get it right. Get it right. The biggest story I ever covered was the Agnes flood. And I really mean that. Of all the stories, I've often been asked that question, often thought about that. And the Agnes flood affected more people than any other story that came along. I mean, 3 Mile Island had all the drama, but nothing impacted people like the Agnes flood. I mean, people lost relatives. People had friends who drowned. People lost their homes. It impacted the people of this area more than anything that ever happened.
And Gene was right in the middle of it. Gene was a couple of blocks from here on a bridge that goes across the Conestoga, and he had one of those old VW vans. And he had all his equipment and radios and everything else in there, and he's coming across the bridge, and the van started to float. And it's going from one side, banging into the guardrail, to the other side, and he just kept the wheels churning, made it across, came back to the station, forget the van, got his film processed, and got his story on the air.
The way we reported on those stories, I think, when you look back, those were WGAL's finest hours when it came to fulfilling the commitment of reporting news to our viewers.
I am so proud to have worked with all these people. Of course, a big part of the news is the weather, and I'll bet that not many of you remember that I used to do the weather. And let me tell you that forecasting and delivering the weather has really changed over the years. Weathermen and women used to draw with magic markers and move little magnets around on a map and get information from the National Weather Wire services. Not always the most accurate.
Dee Bang was our first weather person, and I was her relief. That's how I started doing the weather. And eventually I filled in for every weather show there was.
I was fortunate enough to get the Atlantic Weatherman shot, which was, I think, one of the plums here at the station. Everybody wanted to do it. You worked for an advertising agency and for the Atlantic Refining Company, and it was sort of like big time. It was a nice feeling.
Well, I think back in the 60s and 50s, the National Weather Service was pretty much the exclusive provider of weather in this country.
Oh boy, I'll tell you, when I started doing weather in this studio, in fact, still behind one of the blue chroma key walls was the magnetic metal map, the painted metal wall that you would stick the magnets onto. It was still in the studio, even though we'd obviously gone all computer at that time.
I'm not sure when Joe Calhoun started here at the station, but I know it was shortly after he began here. He came up to the art department and he asked me if I would draw Calhoun's Kids.
Well, Calhoun's Kids was developed years ago when back in Omaha, Nebraska. My wife is a teacher. She thought it was a neat idea to have kids dress appropriately for the weather for that school day.
And he showed me some that he had in color when he was on a Nebraska TV station. And I looked at them and I said, yes, I think I can do this for you.
And we have, I don't know, umpteen versions of Calhoun's Kids in the computer now. WGAL has always given me all the toys I've needed and to have fun in forecasting the weather. That's why I tell people all the time, I'm on TV because I want to forecast the weather. I don't forecast the weather so I can be on TV, and I think there's a distinction there. And they've allowed us to be meteorologists first and then TV broadcasters second. We develop the information and then we deliver that information. And we've always had the best equipment and the best information that money could buy.
When we return, we'll take a look at how WGAL defined the Susquehanna Valley, forever changed news coverage, and introduced you to some folks that have become an everyday part of your lives. Stay with us.
This special program is brought to you in part by the advertising agency Barry Bruce & Company, Lancaster.
Portions of this program were made possible by the Rohrer family of companies. 1 Hour Heating and Air Conditioning, Benjamin Franklin the Punctual Plumber, and Mr. Sparky.
In 1974, WGAL completed the construction on its new tower and antenna on the hills overlooking Hellam, York County. At that time, it was the tallest man-made structure in central Pennsylvania and forever solidified WGAL as the most powerful station in the market. In 1979, the Steinman family sold WGAL to the Pulitzer Publishing Company, which ushered in a whole new era in news coverage. This was no easy task given the news-gathering technology of the day, but that did not stop WGAL, even when all the world's eyes were upon them.
There are two stories that I think, both of them, we can look back. WGAL can look back with pride, and I believe that, and there were other important stories. I'm not discounting any of them, but Agnes and 3 Mile Island.
I was the first reporter on the scene when the 3 Mile Island thing broke out.
As we drove up 283, you could see the towers in the distance, and you could see the steam coming out of the towers. And the other 2 lanes coming toward Lancaster on 283 were just chock full of people driving bumper to bumper, 20 miles an hour, 30 miles an hour. The highway was just crowded with people evacuating, and we're going the other way.
Most of us who were covering that story really didn't know that much about nuclear energy. We didn't know how it worked or what could happen if things didn't work the way they're supposed to.
We had to shoot the film, bring the film back here, put it through the Houston machine. It took 40 minutes to process it, and then look at it on an editing block and edit up the movie film.
When it came in, they process it, put it on the air, we do the show and turn and look into a monitor and try to describe what was happening.
Logistically, it was very difficult because of the distances. The coverage area of Channel 8 was so broad, so wide. It would take sometimes 2 hours to go from one end of the marketplace to get crews out, cover a story, and get back. We looked at this and had to come up with some plans and ideas of how could we better do this, save time with our crews, get more news coverage. When I came in, we were doing the 6 o'clock and the 11 o'clock newscast, and Pulitzer had television stations in other markets across the country that were doing a lot more news than what we were doing here at Channel 8 at the time. We carved out the 9-county coverage area, which the initial signal covered, was basically the Susquehanna Valley. We settled on that. It was heavily promoted in a lot of our on-air promotion as well as our print media promotion. And of course, verbalized it in all of our copy, calling ourselves the Susquehanna Valley. I had, I guess, over 300 and some people work for me. They're on air or photographers or behind the scenes. Susan Chaparro was, again, one of the early people that I hired. Joe Calhoun, meteorologist, brought him in from Omaha, Nebraska. Ron Martin. Ron worked with me in radio. And Pat Principe, who does sports. Mike Hostetler.
Christmas, children, and train just seem to be a natural part of the holiday season.
Kim Lemon, remember the days when she first came in, she was doing our morning news cut-ins and then would go out at 9 o'clock with a film camera and shoot video for a story that she would develop and work on for the evening newscast.
And for a time, I worked 6 days a week. I would do Sunday night weather. I would come in Monday mornings and I would be a reporter. And then Tuesday through Friday, I was the early bird, which meant that every morning, instead of the morning report as you see it now, I did what was called the early bird news. And beside me, there was a bird that came out and a clock on the wall, and I read these brief little news segments.
I was hired as a reporter. A couple of years later, there was a weekend anchor position opening because Kim Lemon was the weekend anchor then. They moved her to weekdays, and when the weekend spot opened, I called Ed Wickenheiser, and said, "Ed, put me in there, I'm ready." And I got the job.
Channel 8 always was on the cutting edge when it came to technology. And that was one of the nice things of working here. And live shots, for example, I mean, that was brand new to us. How do you go about doing live shots? How do you create these?
It was exciting to do live TV. Most of us had never done a lot of live TV. Some had done radio live, but live TV was a different thing, to put pictures to words and have it make sense while you're out there covering the news.
The technology has been wonderful. There's no question about that. When I started, we were shooting, as I said, we were shooting our news stories on 16mm film. We get it back to the station, there was at least a 20-minute downtime until the film could be processed before you could get the story on the air. If it was a breaking story, there was still that downtime. And that would eat away at you. We want to get it on. This is breaking news, but you had to wait. Today, with the technology, it's instantaneous. You throw a mast up on the microwave truck, or you have the satellite truck. You can take the viewer to the story as it is unfolding.
The live trucks were a big step, a giant step, going from film and being able to connect, interlink your different cities via microwave. That was one nice thing. Don't mean to put that aside, but I think satellite transmission, when we got our satellite truck, we could go anywhere in the Northern Hemisphere and broadcast. When you had hurricanes down the shore, we could send the truck to wherever it was on location, and there you are, live. This is what the public expected to see.
Ed Wickenheiser, I still hear from him every now and again. Whenever Ed, who hired me originally, and now I'm lucky enough to sit in his chair, whenever he sees something he likes or something he didn't like, he'll often send me a little note telling me he liked it or he didn't like it, and he just signs it, "A few thoughts from Citizen Wickenheiser." So, so we have that still as part of of who we are.
Even with all these changes and WGAL's intensified commitment to the news, locally produced entertainment programming was still every bit as important as it was in the early days. And some of the great minds that brought you those early shows really stepped up with some winners. When we return, we'll look back at a couple of shows that I know you loved for years.
This special program is brought to you in part by the advertising agency Barry Bruce & Company, Lancaster.
Portions of this program were made possible by Conestoga Tours, Finch Jewelers, and Tomlinson Bomberger Lawn Care, Landscape and Pest Control.
Welcome back. You know, one of the best parts of being on television is becoming a part of your lives. I know that when you're watching WGAL, just like me, you rely on the news, but we've always offered more. And over the years, you were lucky enough to be introduced to some incredible people and taken to some extraordinary places.
Oh, what people, oh, what faces, oh, what fascinating places.
I guess I was 9 months into the job when Nelson Sears came to me and he said, "We're interested in buying a nationally syndicated show called PM Magazine, and we would like you to audition as the co-host."
Channel 8 got the show. It was a syndicated show, but they got the show, and I don't know that anybody else in the market could have given it the same kind of credence and support. We had a good team of people. We had great videographers. We had who were also producers, and we all wrote. And the station really wanted to make sure that we had a good product on the air, and they committed to it. And I think it showed.
I'm Kim Lemon.
And I'm Josh Hooper.
We know you're used to seeing us weeknights at 7:30 on PM Magazine here on WGAL TV 8, but we wanted to take this time to let you know that PM Magazine is on the move.
That's right, PM Magazine is your show, and we travel all over the Susquehanna Valley to bring you the freshest, most revealing stories from right here in your backyard.
We were just out in communities from Adams County to Lebanon County to all over the area that Channel 8 broadcast to, and the station really made a commitment to getting out in all the different areas.
We went to Greece, Israel, Turkey, Egypt, Brazil, Finland, Hong Kong. We would literally brainstorm in the offices of PM Magazine and say, where would you like to go? What would you like to see? What do you want to do? People think, for instance, that Doug Allen and I worked together. Doug and I never did PM Magazine together.
Kim left to move into news full-time, and then Nancy and I started at the same time in 1985.
Hi, I'm Doug Allen.
And I'm Nancy Byrne. And these two are friends of mine and are soon to become friends of yours as PM Magazine's new co-hosts. All right, now, are you ready to go?
I think so. What about you, Doug?
I'm excited. Glad to be here.
Okay, now, it's very easy to do. Just intro the story and take it away.
Okay, thank you, Susan.
All right.
PM Magazine was thrilling. That I have been so fortunate in my life to have that opportunity.
Live from Studio A, WGAL-TV Channel 8 presents 1230 Live.
1230 Live was, to this day, one of the shows that I will always look back on and have such good memories of. It was an idea of our general manager. He thought, I want to do a half-hour live talk. And he had this crew from PM Magazine and this crew that I was on from Susquehanna People, and he merged the crews together. And since I was the on-air host there and there was a male host for the other one, they put us together, and John Curley and I started 1230 Live back in, I believe it was September of 1990. And it ran for 10.5 years, won a couple of Emmys, and it was an exciting, it was just an exciting show to be part of.
It seems every TV station needs an offbeat personality, someone who can bring the lighter side to things, act a little crazy sometimes, do some stuff that'll make you scratch your head. Someone like my friend, Wendell Woodbury.
As we traveled around the Susquehanna Valley, I noticed that there are lots of great stories out there, feature-type stories, things going on that were good news, and just great fun. I thought, well, these should be covered. Fortunately, I had the opportunity to do what became known as Wendell's World. And they gave me total freedom, which was really fantastic. Because there were so many things happening in the Susquehanna Valley that were worthy of coverage. Fun events, interesting people, and I thought, well, this is a great opportunity. And it was. People would send in ideas, and I said, that's great, we'll go do it.
How would you describe Wendell Woodbury? If you have any information about this case, please keep it to yourself. Constantly dieting, or is it constantly eating? You see, he has this seafood diet. He sees food and he eats it.
General, I got it first. You're going to be a private real fast.
Why, something smells foul. Wendell Woodbury. You never know where he'll turn up next, but you can always find him weekdays at noon and 6, only on News Center 8.
Yeah, I'm always amazed. Even today, people will come up to me and say, gee, you kind of got us through a tough time there. And I didn't realize I was doing anything. I was just out there doing silly things, I thought, for the most part, and making that 6 o'clock deadline. But you don't realize sometimes what kind of an impact you have on people.
Wendell was so much fun. One of the first and to this day best uses of television is sports. And my hat's off to the early radio sportscasters who had to try and bring you into the game without you actually seeing it. Television changed all that. In fact, the first network program broadcast on WGAL was a prize fight between Jake LaMotta and Danny Nardico. Locally, WGAL viewers were treated to some of the best coverage of its time, thanks to the pioneering efforts of one extraordinary man.
Well, Jim Mueller, it's no time to talk to a coach just before the soccer game, and I know your team is going to be playing Reading High School in a very short time, but if you just take time out for a few minutes, we'd like to know some things about soccer in the District 3 area this year.
Dave Brandt was a genius, definitely a genius. The man was the dean of sportscasters, the only person I ever knew would memorize an entire show. Everybody thought Dave used a teleprompter. Dave would have a script there and he'd turn page by page by page, never really looked at it, look right into the camera and do a whole sportscast. You'd often find him halfway between the newsroom and the studio, sitting on the steps, reading it over and memorizing it. There's never been anybody like Dave, there probably never will be again.
I'm only the third main sports anchor the station's ever had. It was Dave Brandt, then Jim Stone, now myself. And Dave Brandt was a legend. When I came here, that's what so many viewers reminded me of. He had been here for so long and was just so recognized in the community and the area.
We were groundbreakers in a lot of stuff and continue to be, I think, because I think that's what kind of measures the strength of a station, that you're never satisfied with what you've kind of done in the past, but you're always looking for new ways and new ground to break and new things to do.
And I've always enjoyed the more humorous, the more embarrassing moments, the magical moments, the funnier it is, the more likely I am to put it on. And that's the great thing about the station here. They have allowed me to really, with Hostetler's Heroes, we do the Friday Fab Five. Here, you can do the high school, the local stuff, plus you can have some fun, show your personality.
With the football Friday highlight show, we shoot 16 games a night, so it's a lot easier to spread your coverage around.
Football Friday came along in the mid-90s, and it was something that Pat had been asking for a long time, but we couldn't get the okay from NBC to preempt Jay Leno and The Tonight Show. So they finally gave us the okay, and we got the thumbs up on that, and that has really revolutionized sports coverage in the area. It's become appointment TV for high school sports on Friday nights. High school football is such a big event here, not only for the players and coaches, but the fans, the bands, the cheerleaders. It's really just a big special event every Friday night. High School Playbook is something else. It's our website, which is devoted entirely to high school sports. And this is a great clearinghouse for us to put all of our video on. If you missed the 11 o'clock sportscast and you missed last night's games, you can go on to High School Playbook, download the highlights. In many instances, we'll have raw highlights. We'll give expanded highlights beyond the 30 or 40 seconds that we showed the night before.
Obviously, it's greatly improved, I think, our overall coverage of high school sports, because now we're able to point them during the sportscast and say, if you want more on this particular sport or just more on sports in general today, we drive them to highschoolplaybook.com.
WGAL has been the trendsetter from the moment it signed on. By its 35th birthday, WGAL had grown from 10 employees to 127. In 1985, WGAL was the first area station to broadcast in stereo. By 1990, Channel 8 was on the air 24/7. By 1995, WGAL was regularly bringing you the news via their own satellite truck. In 1997, Super Doppler 8 forever changed local weather coverage. In the late 90s, WGAL expanded their coverage to the web. And in 1999, on its 50th anniversary, Pulitzer Publishing sold WGAL to its current owners, Hearst Argyle. When we come back, you'll get to go behind the scenes with us and share in some of our experiences in being part of this celebration and tradition. Stay with us.
Portions of this program were made possible by Advanced Tech Hearing Aid Centers, TPM Health Insurance, and Lancaster Catholic High School.
If you're enjoying this special presentation of WGAL's 60th anniversary, why not own a copy? For only $19.95, you can own a piece of broadcasting history. The pioneering accomplishments of WGAL are documented in this critically acclaimed special. Plus, there are extra features on the DVD, clips of uncovered film found in the WGAL archives. Call toll-free 877-542-8821 or visit WGAL60.com to order your copy today. This special program is brought to you in part by the advertising agency Barry Bruce & Company, Lancaster.
60 years. It is really incredible when you think about it. And I'm proud to work with so many people that continue this great tradition.
So, and I understand when I sit in Claire McCullough's office, I love to tell people when they come into my office the history of Claire McCullough and how he was one of the leaders of the NAB and actually was the founder of the NAB headquarters down in Washington. They forever named the Hall of Fame, Broadcasting Hall of Fame room was called the Claire McCullough room. And when they put Bob Hope and Lucille Ball in the Hall of Fame, they put their statues in the Claire McCullough room.
Well, the very first time I ever walked into Channel 8, I was a brownie watching Percy Platypus. I remember my troop number, I remember my troop leader, Mrs. Chambers, and I remember walking into Studio A. Of course, I didn't know what it was then. You'd see like Bill Saylor walk by, or Wendell Woodbury, or Dick Hawksworth, or John McElharney, or it was just such a heady experience.
WGAL is the station I grew up, watching. I'm a York native, and some of my best memories, at least of television back in the 60s, was getting up every Saturday morning and watching, the Covered Wagon Theater and the Saturday morning westerns. So to work at Channel 8, was sort of a dream come true.
The nicest thing, the most wonderful thing about my job is being able to literally serve a community that I love so much. Certainly news is the heart and soul of what I do, but I try to branch out into the community to serve in other ways as well.
I think we're not just a news station or a programming station, but we're part of this community, and I think that's what sets this station apart from a lot of stations across the country. The fact that it views itself as part of the community and sees that as an important part of its mission.
One of the ways we contribute to the localism of the television station is to actively get involved in participating in supporting the nonprofit organizations in our area.
I could ask you to name an organization, a charitable organization, and if you did, you would probably name one that we work with. I mean, you talk about the Salvation Army Coats for Kids, you talk about the United Way and the Jefferson Awards and all the other programs that we work with them on, the Red Cross, the programs, the Fire Hurts program, and other programs, especially when there are disasters. We do all kinds of things for the Red Cross. I could go on and on, but every one of those organizations that you could probably name, charitable organizations, we are involved with them with some sort of fundraiser or awareness raiser here at WGAL.
I'd like to believe that you can get your news from just about any source these days, but people turn to us to get it because we're the people they trust to give it to them.
I think this station has set a real high standard as far as weather is concerned, and our forecasting abilities and our coverage abilities. We are lucky here at the station to have a group that understands that when weather is happening outside and it's a significant event, that weather jumps to the fore and the entire newsroom becomes a part of the weather team in essence. So we're very lucky that way, and I'm sure that benchmark will continue to be met in years ahead.
Well, the people, I mean, some of the people here are some of my best friends. Ron Martin, Pat Princeby, and I are both just last year celebrated 25 years. Kim Lemon is a good friend. Brian Roach is a good friend. A lot of people here on the set, at the station are good friends. Susan Shapiro and Dick Hawksworth are two of my best friends. I've spent mornings for over 20 years drinking coffee and talking about the weather with them. So yeah, this place has a real fond part of my heart, for sure.
You realize the kind of history this place has, and there's a reason that people stay here for so long. There's a reason there's a Dick Hawksworth that was able to be here for 40 years, and Kim Lemon, has been here for quite some time, and I think it's a privilege to work for an organization that has been such a big part of people's lives.
I remember I used to lie in bed at night and I would say this prayer. I would say, if I could please just anchor one newscast. Well, look, be careful what you wish for, because I feel so fortunate.
The pressure isn't the competitive pressure. The pressure is to make sure that we're serving this very large audience that watches WGAL in the best way we can every day. A whole lot of people trust us to make good decisions every day about what news to bring them, and that's a tremendous responsibility.
Television is an awesome responsibility, and one that WGAL has taken seriously for 60 years. And part of the reason we're such a trusted part of your lives is the fact that WGAL literally helped to create the medium. From its very first day to this moment, WGAL has had the people and the resources to entertain you, inform you, and become the media partner that you go to first. And we are just getting started. It has been a pleasure and really a special experience to bring you the history of WGAL. Thank you for watching and making WGAL Channel 8 a part of your lives.